Every World Cup needs a stage, and this one borrowed nearly a dozen stadiums built for an entirely different sport. 11 National Football League stadiums across the United States hosted World Cup matches this summer, on loan from the football season. Most of those stadiums were never built with soccer in mind. Their normal playing surface is synthetic, not grass at all. FIFA's rulebook does not bend for convenience. World Cup matches require a playing surface that is almost entirely natural grass. The standard is specific. Roughly 95% real grass, 5% synthetic stitching, laid over an engineered drainage base. That single requirement meant 7 NFL stadiums had to remove their everyday surface and put down something completely different. 7 stadiums, 7 football teams, all facing the same temporary swap before a ball could even be kicked. SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, AT&T Stadium in Dallas, 3 of the league's newest venues all going natural. MetLife Stadium in New York, Gillette Stadium in Boston, NRG Stadium in Houston, Lumen Field in Seattle. 4 more joined the list. 4 other host stadiums needed no conversion at all because they already used natural grass for their regular football season. Lincoln Financial Field, Arrowhead Stadium, Hard Rock Stadium, and Levi Stadium simply kept doing what they already did. That split, 7 converting and 4 already grass, was not random. It reflected a divide that runs through the entire league. Across all 30 NFL stadiums, only about half use natural grass as their everyday surface. The rest rely on artificial turf. That 50-50 split has existed for years, and it usually stays quietly in the background of the football season. This summer, one global tournament pulled that quiet split directly into the spotlight for reasons that had nothing to do with football. Grass conversions like this are not simple landscaping. Engineers had to lay sod capable of surviving weeks of professional play. Sod farms, irrigation systems, and drainage layers all had to be built or trucked in on a tournament's tight deadline. None of that infrastructure was cheap, and none of it was permanent. It existed for one summer on FIFA's schedule alone, which raised an obvious question the moment the first stadium finished its conversion. What happens to all of this grass afterward? The World Cup kicked off in June, and by then, every host stadium's surface had already been settled for months. Some of the 7 converting stadiums had done this before, on a smaller scale, during a different FIFA tournament the year prior. The 2025 Club World Cup had already tested natural grass installations at a handful of NFL venues as a kind of trial run. That earlier trial gave engineering teams a head start once the full tournament schedule locked in for this summer. Even with that head start, the turnaround for this tournament stayed remarkably tight, measured in weeks rather than seasons. The World Cup itself ran a little over 5 weeks, ending in the middle of July with the final in New Jersey. That left NFL teams a narrow window to reverse the process before their own season needed the stadium back. Major League Soccer's own season resumed in mid-July, and NFL preseason games were scheduled to begin in mid-August. That gave even the latest hosting stadiums roughly 3 to 4 weeks to remove the temporary grass and restore their usual surface. Some teams chose to keep their World Cup grass in place a little longer, testing how it held up under real use. Others moved quickly to switch back, treating the conversion strictly as a temporary favor to FIFA rather than a lasting change. Whichever path a team chose, the underlying decision belonged entirely to team ownership, not to the league office. For a few months, though, something unusual happened. Millions of football fans watched their home stadiums host a completely different sport. And for the athletes who actually play professional football on these fields every fall, the swap meant something more personal. For a few weeks, players got to see, in real time, exactly what a natural surface looks like inside their own building. That is not a hypothetical debate happening in a meeting room anymore. It is grass, physically sitting where turf used to be. Players had been asking for exactly this kind of surface for years, long before any World Cup made it a reality. A 2023 survey conducted by the NFL Players Association found that 92% of players preferred grass over artificial turf. That preference had existed quietly for years. This tournament simply gave players the clearest possible side-by-side comparison. Once the temporary grass fields were down, players who spend every fall on turf finally got to test the difference themselves. San Francisco tight end George Kittle was one of the most vocal voices, publicly pushing for the change to become permanent. Kittle said players had made it clear for years that they prefer grass and that it is simply better on their bodies. He pointed out that the World Cup conversion proved something important. If a stadium can install real grass for soccer, it can do it for football too. Kittle framed it as a simple question of priority, saying it comes down to the league choosing to invest in its own players. He was not alone. Multiple players across different teams echoed the same argument once they saw grass installed in their own stadium. Studies cited by players and league researchers have long linked artificial turf to higher rates of certain lower body injuries. That research is part of why the 92% preference number carries real weight inside locker rooms, not just online debate. For players, a temporary grass field was never just a nicer surface to walk on. It read as a safety statement. And the players noticed something else too. FIFA required this standard for its own tournament. No exceptions and no compromise. The league that asked stadiums to install real grass for soccer players was not the same league that employs the football players who use the building every other week. That contrast became the exact argument players wanted the public to notice once cameras were already pointed at these fields all summer. It is one thing to argue for grass in an off-season meeting. It is another thing to point at a stadium and say, "Look, it already happened here."
That visibility is exactly what turned a long-running internal debate into a public conversation almost overnight.
Sports outlets and player advocates picked up the story quickly, framing it as a rare real-world experiment nobody had to imagine. For years, the grass versus turf argument had lived mostly in survey numbers and injury studies. Now it lived on camera every single week.
That shift from abstract argument to visible fact is exactly what player advocates needed to push the conversation further.
So the Players' Union decided not to let the moment pass quietly once the tournament spotlight was already available. The National Football League Players Association turned the World Cup grass story into a coordinated campaign of its own. It was a deliberate, organized push built directly on top of a summer that had already made its central argument visible. The union's statement did not mince words. It called the grass conversion a choice, not a technical necessity. Their message was direct. Certain team owners had chosen to install natural grass for soccer players, but not year-round for their own football players. Players began attaching a simple tag to their own social posts, turning individual complaints into one shared searchable campaign. Washington offensive lineman Laramie Tunsil put the argument in the plainest terms possible for anyone scrolling past. If stadiums can make grass work for the World Cup, Tunsil argued, they can make it work for NFL players too. Indianapolis linebacker Zaire Franklin framed the stakes in blunter terms, tying the debate directly back to player safety. Franklin argued that the cost of doing nothing gets paid by players' bodies and that grass should simply become mandatory. Veteran offensive lineman David Bakhtiari added his own voice, questioning how serious the league truly was about player safety. None of these players were new to this argument. What was new was a stadium sitting right behind them as living proof. Team ownership, though, does not answer to the players' union directly, and reactions from that side of the league varied widely. Some owners were already firmly in the grass camp long before this tournament ever forced the question into the open. Las Vegas owner Mark Davis said football should simply be played on grass, calling it a matter of player safety first. His stadium already uses natural grass, making his position less of a promise and more of a description of what already exists. Other voices in the league office stayed more cautiously optimistic without committing to any specific stadium or timeline. Denver's head coach pointed to how impressive the World Cup surfaces looked in person, predicting wider grass adoption across the league eventually. New York's coaching staff took a more careful stance, calling the temporary World Cup surface a good artificial alternative without fully committing either way. That kind of careful, non-committal language showed up across several franchises, even ones whose players had spoken out loudly. It is one thing for a coach to praise a field. It is another thing entirely for an ownership group to approve a permanent, costly change.
That gap between praise and commitment is exactly where the grass versus turf argument had always stalled before this tournament.
Nowhere did that gap show up more clearly than in Dallas, home to one of the league's most outspoken team owners. AT&T Stadium had converted to natural grass for its World Cup matches, joining the rest of the 7-stadium group this summer. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones made his own position clear almost immediately once the tournament finished, and the question turned to next season. Jones said the team had no belief that grass is actually any safer to play on than the turf it normally uses. He went further, arguing that turf actually improves the economics of running a stadium and playing the football season. For Jones, the grass at AT&T Stadium was a World Cup requirement, not a preview of what the Cowboys wanted long-term. That single explanation captured the entire tension driving this story. Player safety on one side, stadium economics on the other. Artificial turf costs less to maintain year-round, and it holds up better under concerts, other sports, and constant non-stop stadium bookings. Natural grass, by comparison, needs sunlight, irrigation, rest periods, and constant specialized upkeep that a busy stadium calendar rarely allows. That maintenance gap is exactly why only about half the league's stadiums use grass as their everyday playing surface at all. Not every franchise agreed with Dallas's reasoning. One recent example shows the opposite decision is still possible inside the same league. Buffalo opened a brand new stadium this year and chose to build it around a natural grass playing surface from day one. That decision made Buffalo Stadium one of the very few recent permanent switches toward grass anywhere in the league. Most teams, though, are expected to follow Dallas's path once their preseason schedule arrives in mid-August, right on time. The temporary grass will come out, the usual artificial surface will go back in, the stadium calendar will return to normal. What will not simply disappear is the memory of players walking onto real grass and immediately noticing the difference in their own building.
A single global tournament did not settle a debate that has run inside the league for years. It just made the evidence impossible to ignore.
Whether that evidence eventually changes stadium economics is a decision that belongs entirely to ownership groups, one franchise at a time. Compound World tracks the events, decisions, and power structures behind the games themselves, built on numbers that are actually checked, never simply guessed.